While I was sick, I had the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus arrive, and I've had a good chance to use it ever since. We definitely need to talk about this handheld. In ways, this is rivaling my favorite handheld, which is the ROG Ally X. But at the same time, when I first started using it, I almost wanted to return it. So today, we're going to talk about the 10 big things with these two handhelds and why I think one of them is superior to the other. I'm also going to discuss if I decided to keep both of these devices. I'm definitely keeping the ROG Ally X, but at the end of this video, I'm going to decide if I'm returning this or keeping it. Without further ado, let's just jump in and discuss the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus, and if it's worth buying over the ROG Ally X. So let's just hop right in. There's a lot to discuss between these two handhelds. The first thing I want to talk about is the availability. While the MSI Claw is extremely difficult to get, in Canada, the Ally X is actually pretty difficult to get too. This has been out of stock at Best Buy for quite some time. The only place to get a brand new Ally X, at least in Canada, is Asus's website. Whereas the MSI Claw, well, there's a little bit of a story to that one. I've wanted to get this handheld since December. This thing went on pre-order at Best Buy's website. I put a pre-order in for this in January. Best Buy's website actually delisted this twice, but I kept my pre-order. I only saw this ship in February. That was a 2-month delay. And currently, as of writing this review, it's still on pre-order. You can't actually pick this up in stock anywhere. Amazon.ca doesn't list it. We're effectively looking at a $200 price increase over an already expensive ROG Ally X at $1,100. Availability in stock just seems really off on these two models right now. Hopefully the stock normalizes soon, but for now, it's just hit or miss getting either one of these. Now, my time with both of these has been pretty interesting. Right away, do I think that this model here is worth $200 more than the ROG Ally X that I personally have on hand? I don't really think so, and for a couple different reasons. The ROG Ally X is more portable. I can take the ROG Ally X quite easily with me on the go. I personally find the size extremely comfortable, but it's also really portable. The performance is obviously better on the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus, but we'll take a closer look at the performance and the ergonomics later. So how is the build quality between these two units? I've used this for a year, but I've only had this for 2 weeks. Purely subjective opinion here, but I do think that the build quality on the ROG Ally X is much better. What I really like about the ROG Ally X is this plastic. It feels extremely solid, and you also get some nice texture on the grips. I also really like where you rest your hands in the center. It's a solid plastic, but it does feel high quality. Now, I've taken this apart quite a few times. I've also upgraded this to a 2TB SSD. And I think for me anyways, it's just this left side here. I notice it creaking a little bit. Actually, the creaking seems to have gone away. I recently tightened this left side, so I think that might have done it. Even after using this for an extended period of time, I haven't had any issues with the micro SD card slot. I know this was an issue on the first model, but I haven't had that problem here. I currently don't have a micro SD card in mind now because I've upgraded it to a 2TB, but I had one in there before and it never had any issues. The plastic on the triggers has also held up over time. I did have some squeaking on my triggers initially. I put some keyboard switch lubricant in the spring and it seems to have fixed the squeaking. It was pretty annoying at first, but I'm glad to see that that's working much better now. Even after taking this apart many times, I don't have any damage on my plastic. I did put a screen protector on this on day 1, and I haven't had any panel issues either. So build quality wise, for the dollar, this has been a really good device, and I haven't had any issues. While the build quality on the MSI Claw is really good, I don't think it's quite up to what the Ally X is. The plastic feels really solid, and the speakers are really good too. I haven't had any issues with any of the buttons. There's no plastic issues on the molding or anything else. The only issue that I've noticed is I'm kind of worried about the plastic on the back. The plastic over top of the fans looks extremely thin. I hope this holds up over time. I also really like how smudge resistant this plastic is. I don't have any issues with the plastic or anything else on this device. The only thing I've noticed is just this plastic here. It looks a little thin to my liking. What do you think about the design on the back? Do you think it looks a little concerning over here, or do you think it'll hold up to the test of time? Let me know in the comments. But yes, overall, it does feel like a really solid device. And for the price, both of these devices really should feel solid. Hopefully the heat doesn't warp this plastic. Next up, I think we should talk about the weight and the portability of these two devices. I find the Ally X pretty decent for carrying with me on the go. Looking at the weight of the ROG Ally X, this one comes in at 698.2 grams. Now this is a heavy handheld, but you do kind of get used to it. 700 grams is still usable, and it's still easy to take around. I put this in my Tomtoc sling bag when I take it with me to work, and it's very easy to take around. Unless I put a battery bank in my bag, I barely notice the weight of this when I'm taking this with me. By comparison, the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus comes in at 793.5 grams. If I take this with me on the go, I do find this a lot heavier. You know, it's not adding much weight, but that little extra pushes it into almost not being a portable device. It's still easy to use at home, but when you're taking this with you on the go, especially if you have a power bank, you do feel that weight. For me personally, I feel like I've almost been training myself for this kind of handheld size by using the Legion Go. The Legion Go is even heavier at 880.1 grams. Because I've used this off and on, the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus doesn't feel too bad for me personally. If you're used to a much smaller handheld and you're not used to something as big as the Legion Go, you might find the MSI Claw just a little heavy. What do you think about the weight? Is this just too big for a handheld, or is this something you probably could get used to? If a handheld is this big, it better be ergonomic. How does the Claw 8 stack up to the Ally X or the Legion Go? We don't get the biggest grips on the back of the Ally X, but you do get some grip, and it is pretty decent. I find it pretty easy to wrap my hands around the back, and you got lots of space to spread your hands across. When I'm using the Ally X, what I usually end up doing is kind of spreading my hands across the back here. I rest my middle finger on the back button here. Even though I don't really end up using these, I still kind of rest my hand there. You can also easily position your hands to avoid pressing that button. It's nice and rounded on the sides, and it's short enough that you're not really going to have to stretch to reach the controls. I found with the Steam Deck, you kind of position your hands on the bottom and then just kind of have it spread out. With the Ally X, I'm almost moving my hands to the front, and I'm just wrapping my fingers around the back. Honestly, I could play this for hours with no issues. I personally really like the Ally X in terms of portability and ergonomics. So how does the Claw 8 AI Plus stack up? The Claw has some interesting texture on the back, and it still has those same style grips. They're not quite as big as what you'd see on the Steam Deck. But when you're putting your hands on the back, I don't know, for me, I find this enough grip. And you got lots of room to spread your hands across the back. Because of how thin that plastic is, I find myself pulling my hands closer to the edge so I don't put any pressure on that. When I first got this though, I was so close to returning it just based on the ergonomics, but I found that I was kind of using it wrong. I was putting my hands near the bottom and I was like, well, I can barely press these buttons. With the Claw, you kind of have to grab it from the sides, not the bottom. This is such a tall device that it just doesn't make any sense gripping it from the bottom. Ever since I've moved my hands to the side though, I found this really easy to use. Is this better than the Ally X in terms of ergonomics? That's a really tough call to make. I think these are both good in their own way. I think the Ally X is really good for people with small to medium hands. The Claw 8 AI Plus is really good for people with medium to large hands. It's definitely not a device for people with small hands. With medium-sized hands though, gripping it from the sides makes it easy to access all the controls. Like the Claw 8, the Legion Go is very similar. However, I find the little corners on this a little bit more disruptive to your grip, because where your palm sits, it's kind of digging into it. Like the Claw 8 though, this is also a device for people with medium to large hands. For me anyways, I just find myself gripping it from the sides, and it works for me. Another area where this device kind of excels is the grip size. This has way bigger grips than the Claw or the Ally. So rounding this up, the Ally X is good for people with small to medium-sized hands. The MSI Claw 8 is good for people with medium-sized hands to large hands. The Legion Go, being the biggest device here, is good for people with medium to large hands. Performance is another area that I really wanted to talk about. Between this and the Claw 8, while the Claw 8 has much better performance, but it doesn't really translate well to real-world use. The Z1 Extreme does a really good job at keeping up with the Claw in terms of performance, and I haven't had any games between both of these devices that have caused me any performance issues. Heavier games like Jedi Survivor, you can get working easily on the Ally X with a couple different tweaks and just moving your settings around. Both of these devices also have VRR. That means that when you hit 60 FPS or below, the screen is going to smooth out the gameplay. I saw this when I first compared my Ally to the Legion Go. The Ally just felt smoother, even at the same frame rates. And it's the same story with the Claw 8. I think first up, we should talk about some games that are running on the lower end. I'm going to use Sonic Mania for this example. Because the Claw uses an Intel processor, this one has a trick up its sleeve. I do find this one much more efficient than the Z1 Extreme, but both of them are pretty decent. If I go into the Intel graphics software, there's a button at the top here called Endurance Gaming Mode. If I set this to automatic, I have a couple different options here. Efficiency is going to keep the game at 30 FPS. Balance is going to do its best to keep it at about 40 FPS. But if you're like me and you want that solid 60, setting it to performance mode is usually the best way to go. And I've also set this to the AI engine, so this is going to automatically adjust the TDP as needed. I've customized my Ally X to lower itself as needed with the TDP. The Ally does a pretty good job of this, and with the same settings on both, you can kind of see some similarities. The APU for the Ally X is sitting at 6 watts. That's not bad. I've disabled CPU turbo mode, and the CPU can still go up to 3.2 GHz as needed. However, the GPU can downclock itself to about 800 MHz. For low-level gaming like this, 6 watts is going to get you quite a lot of battery life. So how does the Claw stack up? Well, the Claw is actually using more battery life, and that's sitting at about 11 watts. Again, the Ally X is going down to about 6 or 7 watts. That's pretty good for battery. Either way, low battery gaming like this on either one of these devices is going to be really good. Stepping things up to an even more demanding game, this is Hades 2 here. The FPS is set to 120 on both, and it's using the same settings. I have this set to full screen mode in VSync with the graphic options set to high. The Ally X is using about 20 to 21 watts to play this, and it's maintaining a flawless 120 FPS. It does go down a little bit to about 18, but anywhere from about 18 to 21 watts. This is where the Claw does a really great job. For some reason, when it needs to push more demanding games, it doesn't use as much power. I'm only using 8 watts on the APU with a total package power of 15 watts. Which is kind of interesting because the total package power on this is less than what the APU was pulling on the Ally X. 8 watts on the APU with 15 watts total package power versus around 21 to 22 watts with 31 watts total package power. I find it really interesting to see just how much more efficient this thing is even with a bigger panel. I didn't really even have to adjust the TDP on this to get that down like this. The experience with the Ally X is just a little bit more hands-on. You are going to have to adjust the TDP on the Ally X depending on the situation, whereas the MSI Claw does a pretty good job at adjusting itself, and it is using a lot less power. Moving things over to an even more demanding game, let's check out Stray. For the settings, I'm going to set this to exclusive full screen mode. On the Claw, it's going to be 1920 by 1200. The resolution scale is set to 100%. The frame rate is set to uncapped. I also have VSync off. Motion blur is also off, but the graphics settings are all set to very high. For the Ally X, I'm going to use the same mode at exclusive full screen, but this is going to be 1080p. For the graphics, they're all going to be set to high, just like on the Claw. I'm also going to set this to the 17 watt mode on both of these devices. Now this is where we start to see some differences. Zooming in a little bit, so you can see I'm at the same spot in both games. The MSI Claw 8 AI Plus is getting 54 FPS. The GPU is maxed out, so this is a GPU bottleneck. But with the same 17 watt mode on the Ally X, we're only getting 44 FPS. This isn't really a huge FPS difference between both of them, but you do feel it, and the MSI Claw is much smoother in this game. If I move up to 25 watts on the Ally X, it still can't keep up with the 17 watts on the MSI Claw. And as you can see, the Ally X is actually jumping to 30 watts with the 25 watt mode, but it's still only getting 50 FPS, whereas the Claw is running cool at 17 watts with a total package power of 27 watts, and I'm getting 56 FPS. The interesting thing is the Ally X is even dipping below 50 in some points, so anywhere from about 5 to 10 FPS difference. What this effectively means is that the MSI Claw can run at its set APU speed better than what the entire Ally X is pulling from the battery at the same time. Pretty interesting, isn't it? To get these two to match up in frame rates, it's taking 7 to 8 watts on the Claw to match the same FPS as 13 on the Ally X. Much more efficient chip and a way more powerful GPU on the Claw. Either way, you can get this game very playable on both. 17 watts on the Ally X is where this becomes playable. 17 watts on the Claw is also where this becomes playable for this device too. The Ally does have to boost higher to maintain those frame rates at 17 watts. This is one game where I was just really surprised by the results. I didn't expect them to differ this much, especially at the same wattages. For God of War, I'm going to set this to full screen at 720p. I've also set the frame rate limit to 60 FPS with FrameGen on. This is using FSR 3.1 in quality mode. I'm also using a mix of settings. I do also have motion blur set off. To keep things interesting between this, I set this to a 30 watt boost mode so it can match the 30 watts on the Claw in the same spot on both. This is giving us a pretty solid 60 FPS, and the Ally X is able to downclock itself to 25 watts. This is pulling a grand total of 39.7 watts from the battery. The Claw is using 30 watts as well, and the GPU is maxed out. I'm also getting about 65 FPS. And it's also really smooth even with FrameGen on. There's a little bit of input lag though, so let's see what it looks like with FrameGen shut off. Now the interesting thing as well is I can't for some reason change the resolution on the Ally X past 720p. It is set on the side menu to 1080, but for some reason I can't change this. This means that the GPU on the Claw is able to match what the Ally X can do at 720p, but the Claw was doing full HD. So in 720p with FrameGen off, I'm still only getting 37 FPS. With the Claw at 30 watts at full HD, it's going 42 FPS. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? Not only is it pushing a bigger resolution, but it's also getting more FPS either way. You might have noticed that it is compiling shaders on the Ally X, so I'm just going to leave this to complete. It is using some of the CPU though to compile those shaders, so let's let it finish and see what it looks like when it's done. I let it compile, but I didn't really see any difference. So let's jump things up to an even more demanding game, Black Myth Wukong. I'm just going to leave this at the turbo mode on the Ally X, which is 25 watts. As this is a pretty demanding game, you do have to adjust the settings a little bit. I have this at the borderless setting in 1600 by 900. VSync is off. I have motion blur off as well. For the graphics settings, I have the super resolution set to 72% with FSR. Frame generation is also on. I also have a mix of settings here. However, I'm going to use the same settings on both of these devices. So with that 25 watt mode, the Ally X is hovering around 60 to 70 FPS. It's not bad, very playable, and frame gen on this game works really well. You do get a couple little stutters which brings it down, but for the most part, it's not bad. Because this game has online DRM, I can't have it running at the same time. I can't even have this set in offline mode. You need to have the internet to play this game. Using the same settings is where we start to see some issues. Because this is an Intel APU, FSR doesn't always work in every situation. To Despite running a higher TDP and the same settings with pretty much the same resolution, I did have to bump it up because of the aspect ratio. Framegen isn't really working here. It's only getting 52 FPS. You can also see some artifacting thanks to Framegen not working correctly on this APU. This is pretty common on games where I tried enabling Framegen, and then you're going to see like a little bar around the outside and it just doesn't work very well. So you can kind of see that in the top left corner. Just doesn't work very well, does it? If I keep the same settings and just use XESS instead, that problem instantly goes away. 44 FPS still does feel really good on here thanks to VRR. XESS also looks a lot better than FSR on this game. Even when using 1280 by 800 on this, it's still not very impressive frame rate wise. I definitely play this on the Ally X over the Claw any day. Having Framegen just makes that frame rate much smoother. Now Framegen does work in certain games, but for this one, it's definitely not working on this Intel APU. With Ratchet and Clank, it's a little different. So setting this to 1080p at full screen with VSync off, we can use XESS quality mode, and we can also use Framegen with XESS. It is harder to see on this darker screen, but you can still see that same issue on the edges as you're moving it around. AMD Framegen just doesn't seem to work on this APU. However, at 1080p with XESS quality, the game is still really playable, getting around 42 FPS, which is pretty good all things considered with a resolution like this. And input latency is also really good as well. How does it stack up on the Ally X though? With the Ally X, you can still use that XESS quality mode, but if I shut off the Framegen with the same resolution that we have on the Claw, you're getting about 10 less FPS. Since Framegen works on the Ally, you can get a lot more FPS on this than you could on the Claw. It's still playable on both, but I really like the experience on the Ally X better. On AAA games that require Framegen to hit that 60 FPS mark, I am finding myself picking up the Ally X way more, which is a shame because the Ally X is weaker than the Claw. This leads me into the next topic that I want to talk about with these two, and that is the driver. The driver on the Claw is an off-the-shelf driver from Intel, so it's going to be basically plug and play with eGPUs. This also means that you're going to get a lot more compatibility with things like that. You also get 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, whereas on the Ally X, we're getting 1 USB 4. The drivers on the Z1 Extreme also make it a lot more difficult to get eGPUs working, especially AMD ones. This means that if you want an AMD eGPU working on the Ally X, you have to sideload the 7840U driver. I have a video on that, so if you want to get your eGPU working on the Ally X, I'll leave that video linked down below. Driver-wise anyways, I find the experience a lot better on the MSI Claw. On the Ally X, the software is just much better. I like this side menu, and I can access all the settings that I want much easier. It's also customizable, which is really nice. Another thing that you can't do on the Claw is you can't set a custom mode. It's super easy to set on the Ally X. This lets you change the SPL, the SPPT, and the FPPT. So it'll maintain 25 watts, but it'll boost automatically up to 30 for short durations, and you can boost up to 35 watts for very short durations. Whereas on the Claw, you can't really change the wattage here. You have one option where you can kind of just change it between the AI engine to the endurance mode, which I find myself not really using, and then to manual mode. You don't know what manual mode it's set to though, and you can't change it from this menu. When you want to change your manual mode TDP, you have to open up Center M, then go to your user mode, set it to manual, and you can adjust it here. I can't even make a custom TDP either. Sometimes it would be nice to have something between 17 watts and 30, maybe 21, but I can't do that. I can only set it to 8, 17, or 30. You can edit the fan mode in here as well, which is kind of nice because you can do that with the Ally too. As far as the front end software goes too, personally, I just really like the one from Asus. It's much easier to navigate. You have a few different pages on the Ally X, which is really nice. You got all your games here, and you can change the game options for each game. So if I wanted to, I could change the game profile. This means that you can do anything that you want, like change the controls, and you can change your GPU settings, your TDP settings per game. It's really customizable. You can even change your lighting modes based on the game. I love this customizability. You can even change things like your FPS limiter and all these different options. It's really nice. Whereas on the Center M, you're really kind of limited for choice. You can edit a few things about the game, like you can change your background and the game cover, but you can't change the TDP mode for the game itself. You're going to have to change that on the fly. If you click on the updates menu, it's going to take you to the news page first, which kind of feels weird. If you're going to your settings, you should be able to just access the updates. It does say news and update, but I think it should just take you to the update page first, since that's mostly what people are going to look for here. However, the drivers on this do work really well, and it does download and install the drivers nicely from this menu. The settings menu does let you change things like using the AI engine. You can change the lighting modes here as well. You have some noise cancellation options. Basically, anything that you can access in this is also available on the Ally X, but you just have way more customizability and way more options available. The Ally X has better software, but the MSI Claw has much more flexible drivers. The drivers for the Z1 Extreme are specifically just that, just drivers for the Z1 Extreme. So you're not going to get as regular updates as you were on something like the MSI Claw. One of the other issues that I've seen with the MSI Claw is the downloads. For some reason, even though I'm on my 6 GHz band with Wi-Fi 6E, I will occasionally get stuttering cutting out on my downloads. I'm not sure why. This seems a lot less frequent if I have this device plugged in. I also get better download speed if I have the device plugged in too, whereas with the Ally X, I haven't had any download issues whatsoever. So this is working fine now, and it's not getting any download cutouts. I'm getting just over 400 megabits per second with downloads. Not bad, but with my internet plan, I should be able to get 2 gigabits per second. And with the Wi-Fi speed being over a gigabit per second right now, this is a little slower than I was expecting. But just watch what happens when I plug this in. It's at 400, but as soon as I plug it in, watch, it's going to jump. And it does this every single time. I don't think it should have any issues downloading at 700 megabits per second using the battery. But plugging that in makes it just work so much better, and I have honestly no idea why. Very interesting little problem. Does your Claw do this too, or is this just my unit? Let me know in the comments below. There's also just a lot to tinker with this just to see what works better. I do recommend shutting off core isolation for all x86 handhelds. If you're using Windows on your handheld, this can take a huge performance toll. Shutting this off on the Claw hasn't given me any negative side effects, so I definitely recommend shutting this off. This is just one less thing running in the background that can cause issues. Even with a lot of games installed in here, I have 311 gigabytes left. I probably will upgrade this to a 2 terabyte as I found one on sale for a pretty good deal. I couldn't really see any settings in the BIOS that let you change the amount of dedicated VRAM to the GPU. I think it's set to automatic, and I don't think you can change it. This allows Windows to see the full 32 gigabytes of your memory. The GPU is also showing at 18 gigabytes of GPU memory with 18 gigabytes of shared memory. So I think it's all shared memory with the system. Kind of interesting. It does show 16 gigabytes in brackets, so I kind of wonder if this is dedicated up to 16 gigabytes. This is really kind of an interesting setup that they have here. Another thing that the Intel device has going for it is some really low idle states. According to this overlay, the APU is running at 4 watts, with the total device pulling around 9 to 10. That's pretty crazy for idle. How can I take this device with me, and what kind of accessories are available? I really like how my Ally X has a screen protector on it. This means that the screen is going to do a good job at resisting fingerprints, so that's not going to bother me on a daily basis when I'm using it. There's just nothing available for the MSI Claw 8 yet. Looking at Amazon.ca and AliExpress, there's nothing on AliExpress as of writing this review, and the ones that are available on Amazon.ca and Amazon.com all ship from China. So I'm very reluctant to take this with me on the go because I want a good screen protector on there first before I take it anywhere with me, especially when a device costs $1,300. What other accessories do I like for a device like this? Because I take an x86 device with me every single day to work, I like a good bag. For my Ally X, I used this Tomtoc Sling designed for the Steam Deck. The Ally X fits in this little pocket quite nicely. The claw also fits really nicely into this bag. It's a little tight on the sides, but because there's some foam there, I'm not really worried about it. There's a little bit of leeway on each side too, so it's not like it's putting pressure on it. I think this is a really good bag for this device. So yeah, it's really nice to have a bag like this so I can take these kind of devices with me on the go. The only other things that I really like for an x86 device is a good charger, and I also really like to take a power bank with me. If I'm playing a game that demands 25 to 30 watts, you might need to charge your device on the go. INIU sent over their 100-watt charger for me to check out. I've been using these guys' products long before they sent anything over, and I haven't had any issues with it. The one power bank that I had an issue with, the replacement was sent over in a matter of days. These guys have excellent customer service, and honestly, I can easily recommend them. Both of these devices, including the Ally X and the MSI Claw, support charging up to 65 watts. This means it's going to be more than enough for both of these devices. The Legion Go supports 100-watt charging, so this is a good charger for all my x86 handhelds. This little 100-watt charger is way smaller than I thought it was going to be too. Build quality on it's actually really good too. The charger also comes with a really nice cable. Let's give it a try and see what it charges up to. I'm getting 20-volt charging, 3 amps, and 60-watt charging. So this charger is doing a good job with the correct speeds. This will be a really good charger to take the Claw with me on the go. The other thing I like to take with me is a good battery bank. This is the small one that INIU makes. I have 2 100-watt power banks from them, and both have been really good. I generally take either one of those with my x86 handhelds in my Tomtoc Sling. But this one is set to be much smaller. It even looks the same too. Check out the size difference. This big one here that I bought from Amazon is 92.5 watt hours. This will charge the battery bank at 65 watts and charge devices at a max of 100 watts. I got a few different ports on this one. I generally use the 100 watt for charging my x86 devices. I also have a USB-A port on this, which is really good for charging emulation devices. And the mini battery bank has the same kind of ports. You got a 100-watt charger for your x86 devices. You got your 45-watt charger for maybe your phone, and a USB-A port for all your other devices. On the side, there's a little button that shows you the battery percentage. Since x86 handhelds are already very heavy, having a small battery bank with good capacity is definitely the way to go. Despite being much smaller, this only takes the capacity down from 92.5 watt hours to 91.25 watt hours. The weight on my old power bank is about 500 grams, which is pretty heavy. This is essentially like carrying the Odin 2 with you. The mini power bank is even lighter though, at just under 400 grams. This will be a lot better, and it'll fit much easier into my bag. Definitely bring a good battery bank. I use my Anker A40s for my wireless earbuds on all my handhelds. Not perfect, but they offer pretty good sound quality, and the latency is pretty decent. I also got a nice little travel charger now, and of course the cable that supports up to 100-watt charging. So these are the accessories that I like to take with me with my x86 handheld. In my opinion, these are the essential 4 items that you want to take with your x86 handheld if you take it with you on the go. So the moment of truth. Do I think the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus is worth it? I'd say so. It's a really good handheld. It does have its downfalls. Even though I own the Ally X, I will be keeping this one. I did purchase the Claw 8 with my own money, and I would say that I'm happy with it so far. It's just learning how to use it differently than the Ally X. I do really like the build quality. The APU is also very efficient. If I only had to choose one of these devices, I would go with the Ally X. If you have the Ally X and you want a little bit of a performance upgrade, I still don't really think it's worth it, not entirely. If you want a bigger handheld for at-home gaming, the Claw 8 is a very compelling upgrade. The controls are all very comfortable, it does have nice joysticks, everything feels really good. All in all, it's a very, very nice handheld. If you're new to this hobby or you only want to pick up one, go for the Ally X. You're going to have a better overall experience, especially when it comes to just the overall package. I am excited to see what Intel's able to do though. I haven't had any issues with gaming support in general. The only issue that I've had with the Claw specifically is AMD Framegen. That just doesn't work on the Claw. You'd have those graphical glitches and it just wasn't a great experience. But it does work on the Ally X and it works really well. I think that's the big reason why I would pick the Ally X. It's a better overall package, it's smaller, more portable, the performance is decent, it has Framegen that works. XeSS also has Framegen, but not every game supports it yet, but it'll be nice to see down the road. The Ally X is still going to be my main x86 handheld for taking with me to work. I'll be using the Claw at home, but once I get a screen protector on there, I'll probably take it with me to work too. After finishing this video, I think we need to go back and just do a quick update. I decided to return the Claw 8 to AI+, and the reasons are kind of interesting. I play a lot of AAA games on my Ally X, and because of that, I want good Framegen. Framegen, to me anyways, looks a lot better on the Ally X, and the Claw 8 had some issues with it. That's definitely one of the reasons I opted to keep the Ally X. The second reason, of course, being the battery life is good enough for me. Even though the MSI Claw 8 had some better efficiency, the battery life just doesn't feel that different to me personally. The biggest issue was just stuttering. Diamond City Market in Fallout 4 is where I saw it the most. Just walking around in the circle here, you'd notice some pretty big stutters on the Claw 8. However, on the Ally X, this was perfectly smooth. And the reason is kind of odd. I tinkered with a lot of the settings, and I think it's just because Fallout needs you to have dedicated VRAM. This game played pretty consistently too at over 60 FPS, so even though the Claw 8 had more horsepower, the FPS was dipping and those stutters made it feel way worse. To me anyways, the Ally X has just given me a far more consistent experience. I spent days going through the MSI Claw 8 to figure out why it was stuttering, and honestly I couldn't figure out why, so I just opted to return it, and honestly I'm kinda glad I did. The Ally X was expensive, but the Claw 8 was even more expensive, and I think just to me the price was starting to set in. But for $100 less, I would rather get a little bit more stability in my gaming. Since I've used the Ally X a little longer too, I feel more nostalgic to it, and so this is the one I opted to keep. I still stand by what I said in the video. I think the Claw 8 is a good handheld and most games were fine. Just for me personally, I wasn't comfortable spending that amount of money for that level of performance. With the issues that I was having, this is my pick between the two. Are you okay with getting a slightly slower handheld just to get some better stability and less driver glitches? Then the Ally X might be for you, just like it was for me. If you want cutting edge performance and you want the best handheld available, well, the Claw 8 will probably be fixed eventually. And to be honest with you guys, I might even pick it up when it goes on sale. You've heard my opinions, but what do you think about the Claw 8 AI+? Is this a good upgrade for you? And is this your first x86 handheld? What are you going to choose? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions about the Claw, make sure to ask in the comments below. Thanks for watching.